What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. We promised a Friday pod to break down the mock draft, and that's exactly what you're going to get today. It's going to be a quick one. We're going to get in and out of here. I dropped my 7-round Bills mock draft. There are two big trades. We're going to dive into them in a minute. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing great. Love mock draft season, free agency season. It's all here and upon us, Matt.
It is all here upon us. And I think the player that really caught my attention being down at the combine, really starting to do the research into this defensive line class, it's been Kenneth Grant, and trying to figure out a way to get up and get him. I went on it the more the least aggressive route that I think Brandon Beane might have to take to get Kenneth Grant in this mock draft. He goes up 4 spots from pick 30 to 26 in a trade with the Rams. He has to give up a 6th and a 4th to go in addition to 30 to get up and get him. I think it'll probably cost more than that. And the reason why is because I think they're going to have to get up to probably middle of the first round if they want Kenneth Grant. He hasn't tested yet. He didn't do much at the combine. He's going to have his pro day here coming up over the course of the next month. When he does that, if he blows the doors off, it's going to be one of those situations where he is, has the potential to be what so many teams are chasing, that versatile piece, great against the run, can really impact things as a pass rusher, the size, the ability to kind of really change the math on a defensive line. But I love the fit for the Bills, and how this mock draft landed to have him fall to 26 and be able to get up and get him would be a dream for the Bills and Brandon Beane.
Yeah, so Notre Dame fan here, so I generally hate Michigan, but Kenneth Grant is a force, an absolute force to watch, a great fit for the Bills, and I do agree with you. He didn't do much at the combine, some kind of injury where the doctors kind of told him, hold off until his pro day. He said he was going to put on a show at his pro day, and I believe him in terms of his size, his weight, the way that he moves. He's an athletic freak. So that could end up raising his draft stock, but I was reading an article this week about this year's draft class, and it's not top heavy with star power. And someone said it's a needs draft. Everyone's board is going to be a little bit different based on their biggest needs, and where players fall on certain boards are going to be a lot different than others. And a guy like Kenneth Grant could slip through the cracks in terms of falling out of the top 20. And if that's the case, the Bills would be wise to pounce on him anytime after that point. We've kind of seen them, sit on their hands at times in some drafts. They've moved up at times as well. Dalton Kincaid comes to mind. They moved up for Elam the year when they got leapfrogged first, though, for Trent McDuffie. But we've sat here and we've pounded the table the last few years. Go up and get your guy. Last year, we were saying that about Brian Thomas Jr. Didn't happen. You saw the season that he had. Sometimes it's better to be aggressive. And when you have 10 picks, going into this year's draft, knowing that you don't necessarily have 10 holes to fill, using some of those day 3 picks to move up a few spots is well worth it for a game wrecker like Kenneth Grant, who you'd line up next to Ed Oliver, help you significantly in terms of the run stopping, and even has that motor to get after the quarterback.
There's going to be some interesting developments at the edge rusher position in this draft, because there's also quite a range of opinions on a lot of these players. You think about Michael Williams, edge rusher, Mikel Williams out of Georgia. You think about Shamar Stewart, who I think is the one that's really going to be interesting. There's people that think he can go top 5, 6, 7, 8 people. And then there's people that have him not even in their first round mock draft. You have James Pierce, who didn't really wow people with maybe some attitude concerns, is what I kind of was hearing in Indianapolis. Mike Green, the edge rusher out of Marshall as well. And then you have the kid out of Boston College, Donovan Eka. I'm going to mess up the name. I'm still working on the names, but there's a handful of guys that, depending on where things are sitting, when you get to 20, right? Like Brandon Beane goes into every draft and he says, this is how high I'm willing to move up depending on the player. Now, if Kenneth Grant has a grade on his board that is so off the charts, maybe he considers moving up to an area in the middle of the first round a little bit more aggressively than he would in most. But most of the time, what will happen is he'll put a spot in the draft, a numbered pick, and he'll say, how many players do I have in a bucket to where if I'm 6 picks away, if I'm 8 picks away, do I have 8 players that if I get that guy at this spot, I'll be happy with it? And if that pool isn't 8 players, now you start to see the aggressiveness of Brandon Beane and getting up and maybe getting his guy. There's other players too. Nick Amanawara, the safety out of South Carolina, man,
stud.
I wrote about this in the mock draft about maybe like him slipping and maybe if there's a Brian Branch-esque kind of fall, maybe even out of the first round, the Bills should get aggressive to get up in the second to get him. But you got to think long and hard about not only taking him if you stick and pick at 30, but maybe him being one of the candidates that you're willing to move up and go out and get. Because I think after him, it falls off a little bit. Malachi Starks is also in the conversation. It just seems like from an athletic profile, the South Carolina kid probably fits into more what the Bills would be looking for.
Well, I mean, I think he fits in almost anything. The way he tested, the way that he performed at college as well. The testing's part of it. And when players test off the charts, you get excited, but his tape backs it up as well. He was great in college. So great tape, great testing. He did himself a lot of favors at the Combine in Indianapolis. But one last thing on Grant. The good thing that could work in Buffalo's favor is this is a deep defensive tackle draft. And I know 3 tech, 1 tech, there might be more of the 3 techs out there. And guys like Grant at the 1 tech position might be more appealing to other teams. But for the Bills, knowing that this is such a deep D tackle draft, it's very possible that he does fall into that range or even slip all the way to 30, which I don't know if the Bills would sit there until 30. They might move up a few picks if he's still on the board at that point in time.
It's Donovan Izarakwa out of Boston College. I'm probably still butchering that, but he's a guy that could definitely be on the board for the Bills at that spot. And I'm not ruling out edge rusher. The reason why we didn't go edge rusher in this mock draft is because I had them addressing that position in a big way in round 2, trading their first second-round pick, the one they got in the deal for Stephon Diggs, to the Cincinnati Bengals, along with a 5th-round pick. And so right now, in about a week, the comp picks will be revealed. And right now, the Bills are projected to get 2 5th-round picks. And we saw last year they were expecting a 3rd. It ended up being a 4th or whatever it ended up being. So you can't really take into account the projection and it actually lining up. But if you end up with 2 5th-round draft picks, I think you're going to have the kind of ammo if you're Brandon Beane to not only be aggressive to move around the board in this draft, but to make a kind of trade for a player in this situation. Trey Hendrickson been given permission to seek a trade. He was your big name edge rusher to maybe have your eyes on at the beginning of the offseason. I have them sending a 2nd and a 5th to Cincinnati for Hendrickson. Then on the other side of that, that's what makes it complicated. You're going to have to give an extension to a 30-year-old that will turn 31 next season. It'll be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 years at about $30 million per season. Thoughts on that move and sending one of those second rounders, because they still use the other second rounder, and we'll get to that in a minute.
It's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. And I have, I love the Bills Mafia. Let me just say this first and foremost, but I got to call some of you out here on social media yesterday talking about Trey Hendrickson, and the Bills would be wise to pick up the phone and call about his availability once he requested that trade. The 2 things I heard the most is, well, we want Myles Garrett. Well, obviously you would prefer Myles Garrett, but this standoff with the Browns is going nowhere fast. He asked to meet with the owner of the Browns. The owner says, no, thanks. Talk to Andrew Berry. Berry at the Combine was very adamant. He's, part of the Browns part of the Browns, and the head coach said part of the team now, part of the team of the future. They're digging their heels in the ground. You can't sit there and wait and hope for a player to become available, knowing that there's going to be other teams too that are going to be in the mix for Myles Garrett. It's not like it's just Buffalo or bust for a player like that. Trey Hendrickson is available. They're trying to have enough money to extend Jamar Chase. They've already franchise tagged T. Higgins twice. They could move him, but they could also try to lock him up in a long-term deal. And there's only so much money they have. So I do think that moving Hendrickson is going to happen. The report is a late round 2 pick or an early 3rd round pick. The Bills have some of those late 2nd round picks. They have 2 of them. It just makes so much sense. And the second thing I heard from Bills fans is there's no way the Bengals would trade him to Buffalo. They view themselves as the contender. They're going to move him to whatever team is offering the best deal. Right. If the Bills are the only team offering a 2, they're going to move him to Buffalo. I have no doubt in my mind on this. You don't sit there and say, we're not going to move this player because they're in the same conference that we are. That's a foolish way of looking at things, especially a player that is in his 30s. This is not a prime generational player. Maybe then the conversation is a little bit different. But we saw in basketball, Luka Doncic getting moved from the Mavericks to the Lakers. We saw in the NFL yesterday in division trade between Jacksonville and Houston for a Christian Kirk. And I get it, Kirk is not the same caliber type of player as a Trey Hendrickson in terms of what he brings to the team. But teams don't just say, well, we're not going to trade him to teams X, Y, and Z. It's the same reason why the Bills have made trade partners with the Chiefs for better or not in the draft a few times over the years. You don't just rule teams out. You're always open to it. And if the Bills are the only team that offer a second-round pick, hypothetically, he's going to be a member of the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up because I saw that was one of the first things that I thought about in pushing back against people that say that there's no way the Bengals would trade Hendrickson to a rival. I mean, the Bills traded what obviously was a pick the Kansas City Chiefs were excited about in the draft last year to give them Xavier Worthy. And I think that's a piece that is really important. And then I see another comment. Larry, one of our regulars on Facebook, shout out to Larry, always tuning in. Another old pass rusher. I don't know if Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, I don't know if these guys fall into that framing because he's coming off of a season where he had 17 and a half sacks. This is a different story than Von Miller, who even at the point when the Bills got him a couple years ago, he was going into his age 33 season. And that's a completely different area of your career. We're talking about a completely different period of his career where Hendrickson is at the top of his game. And, you know, even if you're making this trade to sign up for 1, maybe 2 years of this peak performance, I still think you're considering it. I still think you sign up for it because you're in a very, very win now window. And the window could be the next 5 years. I'm not saying it has to just be this, but the salary cap is going to balloon over the next couple of years. I don't think you have to really concern yourself too much with the long-term math of it all. You're going to have to be responsible. I'm not saying sign him to the 6-year, $120 million deal, but you know, to be able to get something done, to get an elite presence on the edge opposite Greg Rousseau, to me should be marching orders from Terry Pegula to Brandon Beane this offseason.
And it makes so much sense. His relationship with Ryan Nielsen. Nielsen's coming in. He has this great track record of developing players, which is what you're hoping to get out of Greg Rousseau. But who else could help Greg Rousseau? Someone that's been in the system. Someone like Trey Hendrickson that's at the top of his game. Brandon Beane just can't sit there and not make trades for veteran pass rushers because of the way the Von Miller deal worked out. And, you know, you can't predict injuries. You can't predict when players are going to fall off of a cliff. I get that. But Hendrickson could play every game the next 2 years, the next 3 years, with whatever team trades for him, or if he stays in Cincy. We can't foretell the future, but in a team like Buffalo, when you're trying to win now, hoist the Lombardi Trophy in a very competitive conference specifically, you need difference makers like that. And difference makers like this don't become available all the time. We heard Brandon Beane say it at the end of the season. Yeah, we'd love to have guys like that, but they usually don't become available. And lo and behold, this offseason kind of turned into this player. You know, Jonathan Allen at defensive tackle is going to be released now. And you have these guys that are going to be possibly traded, Trey Hendrickson and Myles Garrett. And probably couldn't foresee that either, but he sat there at the podium and said, we'd love to have difference makers. And now here's his chance to put his money where his mouth is.
The Jonathan Allen piece is really interesting because he's a player 2 years ago that, you know, when I first saw that he was going to be released, my immediate thought was looking at the market value and trying to figure out what this potentially could look like for a team to chase him. He's not been the same player. He's dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years. I think you might be able to get him at a little bit lower of a cost than some of these other big-time free agents, but he also wants a big-time contract. So I don't know if that would be something that Bills are looking to do, but Jonathan Allen, to me, is kind of like what you'd be drafting Kenneth Grant to play that role opposite Ed Oliver. He's done it so well next to so many really, really good pieces on that defensive line in Washington for the last couple of years. All right, with the next second-round pick, before we get there, everybody should become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider right now. Check it out. 2-week free trial. It's $3.99 a month. That's it. Just a cup of coffee, maybe less than a cup of coffee, depending on where you go, a month. 716-528-6727. Send that number a text. You'll get signed up for the free trial. And Ryan and I will be firing off so many insider analysis text over the next week as free agency comes. We'll be putting out our list of 10 free agent prospects that we think the Bills should chase here starting next week. The insiders will get that first. So it's a great time to become an insider rider.
A great time. Check it out. We have year-round coverage, but this time of year especially, legal tampering window, NFL draft talk, top 30 visits are going to start rolling out here soon. Become an insider today. You will not regret it.
All right, so 1 second-round pick is gone. The next one is up at 62, and that is going to be TCU wide receiver Jack Bech, somebody that I talked to Chris Trapasso about a couple weeks ago in Indy. What I really like about this guy is twofold. Number one, clutch gene. He makes big plays in big-time moments, has a superb elite-level tracking ability down the field. So on the deep balls, like finding an area of the field to get to, winning contested catches, all kind of in a couple of ways similar to Keon Coleman. He's not going to blow you away with his ability to run, but I think the Bills can satisfy that in other ways. I think you can maybe go out and get a receiver with some speed in free agency, and then go out and get a guy that you think can become or be developed into a great wide receiver. This is a pet peeve of mine. A lot of people say, well, too similar to Keon Coleman. Like, I don't think you should double up on that. I don't think anything that we saw in year one from Keon Coleman should be making anybody comfortable projecting him long-term as any type of role in this offense. I don't think the Jack Bech pick has anything to do with Keon Coleman, and I think you keep accumulating really good players. And I think we saw that no better example than in 2022 when they drafted Elam and came back with Benford, and Benford ended up becoming the good player, and they've leaned into that player. You continue to add good players. It's also my argument at defensive tackle. People are like, I don't want an undersized three-tech defensive tackle. Why not? You want disruptive players. You want to go out and try to find guys that can impact the game. Ed Oliver's not going to be on this roster forever. So you're not just drafting for 2025. You're drafting for 2025 and the entirety of that rookie contract. So I'm not so sure that anything on the current roster outside of Josh Allen is stopping me from drafting a player that might have similarities to another guy in the roster.
No, absolutely not. And I like the receiver choice that you had. If I were to push back with one other wide receiver prospect at that spot, and I don't know what your mock draft showed, Jalen Royals, Utah State. High on him, would not hesitate to use a day 2 pick on Royals. Projects very well, played very well. One of my favorite wide receivers in this draft class. But a wide receiver at this point in time, not against that idea at all. You still want to add another weapon to this team. And if your focus, whether it's, a trade like Hendrickson early on, adding a defensive tackle of Grant's caliber, day 2 of the draft is where you want to add a receiver that you think could be in the mix early on in his career, be a contributor year 1 as a rookie, and then obviously develop into a much bigger role year 2 and beyond. Khalil Shakir is kind of a good talking point there in terms of how he started out very slowly year 1 as a rookie in terms of opportunities, and we've seen him kind of take off. Jalen Royals, different skill set, different type of receiver, obviously. I could see the same thing. Contributor year 1, big-time contributor year 2, 3, and beyond. So wide receiver there, not against the idea at all, and I love your next pick, by the way.
It's a very, very large draft haul for the Buffalo Bills. And up next in the 4th round, listen, this is one of those ones, again, we don't know where all these guys are going to end up going. Stay with me for the reasoning why I have Jamari Caldwell being available, the defensive tackle out of Oregon, at pick 4 or round 4, pick 131. This is an absolutely stacked defensive tackle class. And what's going to end up happening is that you're going to have some of the elite guys going early, and then those teams that are needy, that need that specific position, are going to gobble up some of these guys, and then a couple of them are going to get pushed down into later drafts. Because if I'm a team that doesn't land or able to hit on one of those early guys, I now know that some of the other teams that I'm up against have already satisfied that position. So a couple of these guys I think are going to get pushed down a little bit. I don't know if it will be Caldwell, but I love what he brings. 330 plus pounder. He's got a little juice. He was at the Senior Bowl and showed some ability to win in one-on-ones, but he's also a run stuffer. He's somebody that you could put out there as a true one technique nose tackle and trust in his ability to defend the run, gobble up double teams, and again, give more support to Ed Oliver on that defensive line. I think these two players, outside of Hendrickson, but a Kenneth Grant type and a Caldwell type, to me, changes the math for what I think the kind of expectations we can have for Oliver in 2025. And I'll tell you right now, nobody will be happier than Oliver to have those kind of guys added to the roster, because he's going to be probably coming back to the negotiating table in the next couple of years. And this is the kind of season that can set up his next negotiating window for his next contract.
Yeah, if the Bills draft Grant and Caldwell, I'm breaking out the Mega Meat shirt on draft night. I mean, that's just a lot of beef on the interior of this line. And it's a great idea.
You had that one holstered. You were like, Parrino, get done with whatever your spiel is. I got this meat line that's just going to send them.
No, but just, the big boys in the middle of the defensive line, I'm never going to be against double dipping at a position. Sometimes you hit on the position in both picks. Sometimes it ends up being a 1-for-1, and it's not necessarily, back to back or, early picks. We've seen it with obviously Kyrie Elam and Christian Benford. Elam hasn't panned out. Benford has panned out. John McCargo, Kyle Williams. McCargo didn't work out, and Kyle Williams, and by the way, congrats Kyle Williams, defensive line coach at LSU, officially announced here, or reportedly announced, I guess I should say. Sometimes it works out that way. You double dip and one works, one doesn't. And if the Bills got Caldwell, I could see both of them playing a huge role with the way that Sean McDermott rotates these defensive linemen, these D tackles. It becomes a position where you probably feel like you don't have to really address that other than with some, vet minimum type players these next few years, because you're going to feel really good about that 1-2 punch.
Just a quick rundown of the rest of the draft. In round 5, I have the Bills selecting Malachi Moore, safety at Alabama. Just a guy that's played in a big-time program for a couple of years, very familiar in his own scheme as well. I thought that could potentially pair pretty well. Dorian Strong, cornerback out of Virginia Tech, at 179 in the 6th round. That got a lot of rave reviews. A lot of people high on Strong as like a day 3 target. Played, really showcased some skills in his zone scheme there at Va Tech, and somebody to keep an eye on. Then I have Donovan Edwards, just from like the complete profile at that range of the draft, I thought could be something that they'd be interested in. And that kind of wraps it up. Again, day 3 picks on a 7-round mock draft in early March.
Right.
I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about all these guys, but there's a couple of really good sites. And I love your take on all this and positionally where you'd go with these last couple, if it's different. But I put out, man, I missed the Draft Network. Remember the old mock simulator was so gem. Awesome. Like, and now it's like PFF is fine, and there's a couple other ones, Pro Football Network, that I tend to like dabble in. I think I found a new one that I really like. It's NFLDraftBuzz.com. If you haven't tried that one yet, it is excellent from this perspective. It's got trades, it's got a nice interface. That's all cool. But when you click on the player, it brings up their entire profile, their history, their strengths, their weaknesses, really get you kind of able to learn up on a lot of these prospects. NFLDraftBuzz.com. It was a pretty good tool that I used for this mock draft.
I'll definitely have to check that out, because before long I'll have my first mock out. Love, the positional picks make sense. The Bills with the running back position, everything going on with James Cook. Who knows about Ty Johnson? I think the Bills would love to have Ty Johnson back, but if he tests the market, I would not be shocked if a team offers more money and in a bigger role, like a true number 2 running back role where, yeah, he was that at the end of the season for the Bills, but they're going to want Ray Davis out there a little bit more in year 2. They might not be able to guarantee as big of a role for him here in Buffalo. So adding a running back late makes sense. Obviously I would love to address cornerback earlier in the draft because of everything with Rasul Douglas being up in the air as a free agent, having Christian Benford, and then a lot of question marks. But that's also the beauty of free agency. There's going to be a few corners that sit there on the market that the Bills could then pursue after the second, third wave of free agency. And then that's a stopgap where you could then draft a player like Dorian Strong, develop him the way that the Bills have had a track record of doing, and hope that in year two he could take on a sizable, bigger role. And maybe it's a veteran like Darius Slay, where he's older, but he can still, for in a 1 year, 2 year pinch, bring a lot to that cornerback room, the leadership perspective. I saw they were getting rid of James Bradbury as well, and honestly, I have not watched enough of Bradbury to know if he still has any juice at all as a defensive back. But there's going to be players like that, veterans that become available, that sit on the market a little bit, and the Bills could address that position that specific way.
Let us wrap up with the big news of the day. The Bills, with their second big-time long-term extension, agreed upon earlier this morning. Terrel Bernard, middle linebacker, is number 2 in the pecking order. He gets a 4-year contract worth about $50 million, 25.5. About half of that contract is guaranteed. First thoughts on this deal, Ryan. I think this always made sense because the number was going to be lower. I think it's more complicated with Benford because if I'm Benford or Rousseau, I still kind of want to string this thing out maybe a little bit, because next offseason, if you become a true free agent, that gives you the ability to really negotiate. I think Benford would probably be in the bucket of being more willing to come to the negotiating table and find something that makes sense. But I'm not surprised that this was Bernard. I think when we see the final numbers of this thing, it's going to blow you away with the team-friendly nature. And I'm not surprised. He's a captain. He's well-liked in the building. Obviously wants to be here. Made a lot of sense.
And I think the captain factor of it makes a lot of sense in terms of why he was next. Sean McDermott praised him this year. He had that it factor, that leadership factor. Only 2 captains last year with Josh Allen and Bernard, so why don't you keep him in the fold for the next several years? It does make a lot of sense, and it's less complicated at linebacker, as you mentioned, than cornerback. Cornerback 1 money is getting, 20+ million per year, possibly, and obviously edge rushers, they're coveted in this league, and I'm sure there's a lot of teams that probably think that Rousseau still has more upside to his game. So in terms of those 3 players, and then obviously James Cook can throw in that mix as well, but he's made his feelings really well known about the numbers, so I can see why that hasn't happened yet either. But Bernard coming in, he's comes in at the 5th highest inside linebacker with this deal in terms of AAV. That's great for me. I mean, he's not breaking the bank. It's a team-friendly deal just in terms of the regular numbers itself. You look at what I'm sure the first few years team-friendly cap hits are going to be, and it's the same thing I keep mentioning. They're coming in under what the projections probably would say. And then 2, the cap's going to keep going up. So these deals are going to keep getting better and better. When next year, 2 years down the road, where is he going to be in terms of the highest paid inside linebackers or linebackers in general? It's going to keep falling down that list, and it's going to look like a better and better deal as the years go by.
One more little piece of news yesterday. Sam Martin, Bills multi-year punter over the last couple of years, I think coming off of a really excellent under-the-radar year. Obviously a great holder. The Bills decided to release him. They were reportedly working on trying to come to some type of agreement to keep him on, but to open up $2 million in cap space when the Bills are kind of scratching and clawing for $5 or $6 million to just be cap compliant. And I don't think they're scratching and clawing just for that. I think we're going to see more over the next couple of days. I just think this made a lot of sense. They went out and they brought in a former 4th-round pick, Jake Camarda. Jake Camarda, that was with the Buccaneers the last couple of years. Didn't have a good season last year. The reason he was released. So he's going to have to kind of get back to the drawing board and see if there's anything there. But again, it's punter. I think they can find some answers. Bring in a couple guys. Joe Biscaglia will be pumped. It'll be Puntapalooza all over again. But Sam Martin, not likely to be back. Although I think I did see one thing that said that he might, the Bills would be open to bringing him back at maybe on a new deal.
Yeah, let him test the market, and if you can come in at a reasonable enough number. He is great as a holder. He did have a nice season this last year in Buffalo. I thought a bounce back year. But punters, you can find one late in the draft on day 3, especially if you do have multiple day 3 picks, late day 3 picks. UDFAs bring in for competition. There's going to be guys, vets out there too. The least of Buffalo's worries, most likely, in terms of their roster construction for 2025.
All right, that'll do it. We wanted to do 20 minutes. It's hard for us to get on under 20. Right? We get to talking, doing our thing. I'll give you final word.
Final word, stick with us this weekend. especially. And then on Monday, when that legal tampering window begins, we'll have all the latest news reports and rumors up on Syracuse.com, NYUp.com. We'll talk about any juicy rumors, I'm sure, on Monday afternoon, and we will keep you locked in on all Bills news, not just on those websites and on YouTube, but also as a Shout Insider. You'll get that news first. Join Insiders today. You will not regret it.
716-528-6727. Send a text along. Get your free trial going. We will see you soon. Next week, free agency is here. Take care, everybody.